Welcome everyone to my recap and review of the episode The Last Outpost, where we get to meet the Ferengi for the first time and laugh at how they were meant to be the big bad threat to the Federation. As always, spoilers ahead, otherwise sit back and enjoy. The Enterprise is in pursuit of an alien ship that stole some equipment from an unmanned outpost. They belong to a race called the Ferengi, and Starfleet knows almost nothing about them, so everyone is really looking forward to getting a good look at this mysterious race. As they drop out of warp, Worf reports that they're in visual range, even though we already saw them in visual range. And Picard wants to see a full-sized image, so Worf zooms in very slightly, ensuring that he's not winning any Officer of the Month awards. The Ferengi ship fires at the Enterprise a couple of times, and Yar wants to shoot back, but Picard isn't too bothered and tells everyone to keep calm and carry on. As we finally get a good look at the ship, we wonder if the Ferengi have been watching Star Wars because the design looks suspiciously familiar before things start going wrong as the Enterprise becomes immobilized and systems start failing. Picard, no longer calm and carrying on, realizes he may have underestimated the Ferengi and starts trying to sort things out, but there isn't enough power, so he sends LaForge down to engineering to find out what the fuck is going on, because apparently the phones are down too and he can't reach them. Picard then tries to get more info on what we know about these Ferengi. Data explains that what little we do know is that they're basically capitalists with about the same level of ethics as EA, seeking profit above all else. Picard tries calling engineering again, but still gets no answer, so despite sending LaForge down literally 2 minutes ago, sends Riker down as well. Down in engineering, Riker wants the bottom line from LaForge because the chief engineer apparently didn't bother to turn up for work this morning. LaForge explains that some strange force is countering any move they do with equal force, thus holding them in position. Riker then gets an idea about doing some kind of space version of a J-turn, which makes LaForge very excited, so he starts giving orders to the engineering team whilst Riker channels Scotty and asks him to give him everything he's got. Seriously though, where the fuck is the chief engineer? Did she get fired? Is no one else in charge down here? Isn't Riker in charge of personnel assignment? Back on the bridge, Riker explains to Picard his cunning plan, but Worf isn't impressed and says he has a much better plan where they have at them and die gloriously. LaForge arrives, says the plan is ready and that the phones are back on, so Picard tries to call the Ferengi again, demand they return the stolen equipment and tries to bluff them before hanging up, whilst Riker quotes Sun Tzu, making Picard pleased that ancient Chinese war philosophy is still being taught at school, which I'm sure won't be relevant at all to the plot later on. So Picard initiates the cunning plan. The ship shakes, the lights dim, but nothing happens and they're still stuck and have now wasted a fuck ton of power, causing Picard to swear in French because you can totally get away with saying shit in another language on TV. Someone then hacks into the computer and starts copying all their data, further impressing everyone with just how advanced the Ferengi seem to be. But Troy actually makes a useful suggestion that in all the drama they've ignored the planet below them. So Picard calls a conference and everyone immediately forgets about the planet below them and instead go back to talking about how to deal with the Ferengi. Yar and Worf are still wanting to shoot at them whilst they still can, but Troy, once again surprising us all by being useful, suggests Picard try talking to them again, but instead try a different approach. Picard then goes back, calls the Ferengi, and instead of blustering, tries to offer terms to resolve the situation and to give him a call back when they can. In a log entry, Picard fears what those terms might be and hopes they don't involve a ransom email about his password and browsing habits from the earlier hack into their database. Yar says the shields are going to collapse in 1 minute, but then something happens and the Ferengi finally return their call. Some chap calling himself Damon Tar quotes the Enterprise's registry number for some reason and then asks if they want to discuss surrender. Picard tries to weasel his way out of saying the word, but Tar interrupts him and says they won't accept any surrender and will fight to the last man, which makes Picard realise that their ship is in the same predicament as the Enterprise, and puts Tar on hold. You know, it's a shame that no one suggested earlier that they look at other causes to their problem. Oh. With his mistake realised, Picard gets LaForge to send a probe down to the planet to find out what's going on before resuming his chat with Tar, and asks if he can turn on his webcam so they can all see each other. Tar knows the Ferengi are fuck ugly and doesn't want us to see this, but Picard uses the situation to his advantage, bluffs them and forces him to turn on the webcam, giving us all an extreme close-up view of just how fuck ugly they are. Tar tries to suggest the Humans are fuck ugly instead, but acknowledges that the Enterprise has them immobilized and offers the stolen equipment and his second officer as compensation. Picard says he'll think about it and wants to hold another conference, whilst Data counts himself lucky that Starfleet doesn't have a similar rule regarding its own second officers. In the observation lounge, we learn about a long-dead civilization called the Takon Empire, which died out some 600,000 years ago, and the planet below them is some sort of ancient leftover outpost. Whilst Data gets stuck in a Chinese finger trap, the probe LaForge launched earlier shows the planet holding both ships in an extremely powerful energy field. Picard thinks it's worth checking out in more detail, so asks Riker to prepare an away team and even considers inviting the Ferengi along. Damon Tar, still in extreme close-up mode, has realised that the planet below and not the Enterprise is holding his ship, so he withdraws his surrender but accepts Picard's proposal of sending a joint away team to the planet to solve their mutual problem. Riker doesn't like it though and suspects foul play, and with a face like Tar's it seems fucking obvious. Troy backs him up by saying she senses that Tar is hiding something, which is bullshit because
Betazoids cannot read Ferengis.
So Riker asks for more manpower as backup and decides all he needs is Worf because he never gets his ass kicked. Oh. Data explains that they won't be able to use their phones or get beamed back, and then the away team is sent down to the planet only to find themselves all separated from each other. As we get a brief look at this vast, barren and stormy wasteland, Riker is shouting trying to find the others when he finds Data studying a strange crystal-like structure. We then find LaForge hanging upside down from a rock. Riker asks if he's conscious and LaForge says he's just fine. Is it standard away team protocol to ignore your commanding officer when he shouts your name, or do you have to wait until he finds you for dramatic purposes? We spot 3 Ferengi closing in on the team. Riker asks who they are, but it seems the blue whips are some sort of unnecessarily elaborate and impractical stun weapon which the Ferengi then use to knock out the away team. As one of the Ferengi examines them, checking out the gold content of their comm badges, the other 2 drag an unconscious Worf onto the scene, and we see they've put the away team into a neat pile, with Riker's head maybe being a little too close for comfort to LaForge's crotch. As the Ferengi debate about blaming the away team for breaking the agreement, Riker wakes up to some dramatic thunder and lightning which seems to cause the Ferengi pain, allowing Worf to take advantage and charge in. Suddenly everyone is awake and a fight ensues, and despite outnumbering them, having an android with super strength and a big angry Klingon, the Ferengi somehow still manage to defeat them, until Yar comes in and saves the day with her phaser. The Ferengi are shocked a woman is with them, and apparently even more shocked she's wearing clothes. Meanwhile in orbit, it looks like there's not even enough power on either ship to keep the lights on, and we find it's gotten rather chilly inside the Enterprise without the life support systems functioning. Back on the planet, the Ferengi are moving about like monkeys, and the away team decide it's time to shoot them, but as they fire their phasers, the beams get distorted and pulled into the strange crystal structures that Data was examining earlier. The Ferengi try to shoot back, but the same thing happens with the energy being diverted. Everyone is confused, but LaForge realises that the funky shit he's been seeing with his visor makes sense now, and that it seems the entire planet is some sort of giant battery that sucks in power. Suddenly, a swirling cloud of energy shifts around them before forming the image of a face who immediately insults them before demanding who will meet the challenge. The Ferengi immediately point to Riker, and the cloudy face asks him if he's petitioning to join the Takon Empire. Riker though wants to know who's asking, and the cloud coalesces into a humanoid figure who calls himself the Guardian. Riker then wants to know why he should join an empire that doesn't exist anymore. The Guardian is a bit upset by this implication and thinks it's all fake news, even when Data tries to explain. The Ferengi try to turn this against the away team by suggesting the Humans are deceptive and selfish because they won't share their cool stuff with other races, and clothe their females before striking some hilarious poses. The Guardian asks if Riker will give himself up for judgment. He agrees and goes on to admit that yes, the Federation does have its flaws and that they'll even allow entire civilizations to fall. The Guardian calls them barbarians and prepares to personally challenge Riker, causing Worf to protest because he thinks he's such a badass warrior, even though he just got his ass kicked by a fucking Ferengi. But Riker says he's man enough to do this himself. The Guardian then offers Riker a thought by quoting Sun Tzu at him, and then charges Riker with sped up camera footage but stops just short of cutting him in half. Riker, being the ballsy fucker he is, doesn't even flinch and answers the challenge with another Sun Tzu quote. The Guardian, now satisfied, starts being best friends with Riker, releases the Enterprise from the energy field, and they start having a good philosophical chat. The Ferengi want their ship released too, and the Guardian asks if he should just kill them, but Riker says they'd learn nothing if he did because he sees them much as humans used to be, so he agrees to let them go. When asked what he'll do next now that the Takon are extinct, he says he might as well just go back to bed and then vanishes. With power now fully restored on both ships, Picard offers his compliments to Riker because they even got their stolen equipment back. Riker suggests thanking the Ferengi by sending over the Chinese finger puzzles, which tickles Picard, so he says go for it before ordering the Enterprise off to its next destination. Well, after Code of Honor, this was a far more entertaining, though by no means great, episode. After 3 stories now which heavily relied on original series tropes, godlike beings, dumb cultures with dumb rules and forced situations, and even a literal copy of an old episode, this is probably the first episode of TNG that actually feels like it's starting to expand its own universe with the introduction of the Ferengi. That's not to say that there aren't TOS influences here, with the Guardian being yet another super powerful being challenging humanity's place in the stars towards the end, but the episode focuses primarily on the immediate threat of the Ferengi and the situation both parties find themselves in, rather than the rather disappointing resolution. So let's talk about the Ferengi. Since the Klingons in this era are now allies of the Federation, the writers needed a new foe for the Federation to deal with, and thus the Ferengi were born. They are an ideological opposite of what the Federation stands for, which is basically a post-scarcity socialist utopia that emphasises mutual cooperation and respect. The Ferengi, on the other hand, are pure capitalists, seeking nothing but profit in the pursuit of personal gain, wealth and power at the expense of anything else. Both powers are extremes of each other, and on paper this sounds like it would have great potential in the exploration of both ideologies, how they would clash against each other, and could be used to examine how these ideologies impact us in the real world, given the ever-ongoing debate of capitalism versus socialism. Unfortunately, the implementation of the Ferengi is a pretty disastrous one, and they just ended up being utterly ridiculous, which is a shame because they had quite a promising start. The initial build-up with the Enterprise chasing the Ferengi ship down, the discussions surrounding what little Starfleet knew about them before they got presumably shut down and immobilized with them, it was good stuff and it added to the mystery and suspense. It also helped sell that these guys might be a real threat to Starfleet and quickly turn the tables on the initially curious and confident crew. It then keeps building them up to a big reveal by their initial refusal to show themselves visually, but when we finally do see them on screen, the ability to take them seriously just evaporates. It's a huge letdown, and from this point on the episode mostly devolves into mediocrity and bullshit. The extreme close-ups of Tar on the view screen are hugely distracting, and the guttural speech, which I think is meant to sound intimidating, just comes off as dumb and almost caveman-like. And it only gets worse once we come face to face with them on the planet, distractingly moving about like monkeys and striking the occasional hilarious pose. This was the threat to the Federation the writers wanted us to take seriously? The only thing I will say in their favour is the aesthetic design of the Ferengi is actually fairly decent and distinctive, if not one I'd take seriously as a scary threat. With the Bandi and the Lagonians being the only two alien races we've so far encountered in the series, this is the first genuinely alien-looking species we've come across that didn't just look exactly like a human. Likewise, the Ferengi ship is very different but distinctive looking to the Enterprise or anything we've previously encountered in Star Trek. Luckily for us, the producers of the show realised how much of a disaster they ended up being, and the idea of the Ferengi being a major foe was quickly dropped, instead replacing them with the Romulans and then later the Borg. Can you imagine how different TNG would have ended up being if they had stuck with the Ferengi as the big bad? I shudder to think. It's worth noting that one of the main Ferengi characters here is played by Armin Shimmerman, better known later on as Quark in Deep Space Nine. Armin has himself stated that he felt very responsible for how the Ferengi were initially depicted, and took the role of Quark to try and undo some of this damage, and I think he ended up doing a superb job of that. Thanks to Quark, DS9 ended up fleshing out the Ferengi in a much better way, keeping that extreme capitalistic society but going into much more depth about how they worked and using them for comic relief more than anything particularly serious. Though Ferengi-centric episodes themselves were always very hit and miss in terms of quality writing. But Quark for me is how the Ferengi should have been in the first place. Ruthlessly greedy traders, merchants and information brokers rather than a major threat. And we ended up with some interesting moments where the ideologies of the Federation and the Ferengi were compared against each other and examined in intelligent ways, all through this one character and his immediate family. But enough about this, let's move on. Once everyone figured out that the planet is the source of their problems, we get to the other disappointing aspect of this episode, that of the Takon Empire. Although there's a nice bit of world building earlier on with an explanation of their history and power, their implementation here is again poorly done, encapsulated by the Guardian character, and reverts to the TOS trope of a powerful being taking control and challenging humanity. It tries to build them up briefly, only to quickly undermine that with the Guardian initially challenging Riker and then becoming immediately chummy and friendly with him after passing his riddle test. Apparently all you need to do is quote a bit of Sun Tzu and you're laughing. They then have a quick but shallow debate about their respective philosophies, and then 2 minutes later the episode just ends. It all feels like a wasted opportunity, and I think the Takon would have been much more interesting if they had their own self-contained episode without the Ferengi being a factor at all. You could just have the Enterprise going about its business, exploring when it gets trapped by the ancient Decon technology, forcing the crew to investigate and examine this once powerful empire and perhaps have some beefy philosophical discussions while we're at it. Ah well, never mind. As for the crew, there's not a huge amount to say here. The scene with Data getting himself stuck with the finger trap is mildly amusing, but also faintly ridiculous when you consider his android strength should really just allow him to rip it apart with ease. And at the end where Riker suggests beaming over the finger traps to the Ferengi as a thank you is reminiscent of Scotty beaming over the tribbles to the Klingons in the TOS episode The Trouble with Tribbles. The episode though mostly focuses on the crew working the problem, and it feels like we've still got some way to go before everyone gets more comfortable in their roles, but there is a sprinkling of character development here and there. We get to see a bit more of Picard's overall style of command, where he likes to hear the opinions of his officers before making informed decisions, whilst at the same time holding back on any rash actions that might escalate a conflict, even though in the last episode he was a bit all over the place. Troy was actually pretty useful being an advisor, making good suggestions to Picard on how to handle the situation, even though she was totally ignored when she commented about the planet. Riker shows his strength and willingness to face any challenge thrown at him. Geordi gets to show how he has a good grasp of engineering and isn't just there to use his visor to see things the others can't. And as for the rest, Dr. Crusher is really only around to try and keep everyone warm. We get no sign of Wesley except an offhand comment from Crusher. Yar gives status reports and mostly just wants to shoot things. And Worf is still just Worf. So a fairly decent start with a pretty disappointing ending. Next time, the crew literally go where no one has gone before in the episode where no one has gone before. If you enjoyed this video, please do like, subscribe and share. This has been Jay Warden, signing off.